Welcome back, folks, to another mind-expanding episode of One Wild World. Today, I've got a guest who's not just deciphering animal intelligence, he's rewriting the entire conversation. I'm talking about the one and only Dr. Marc Bekoff. This guy is the real deal. I mean, he's been studying animal behavior and cognition for over 4 decades. He has plenty of articles published in Psychology Today, and he's here now to share some pretty mind-blowing insights with us. If you've ever been curious about the emotions that your pets experience, you're not alone. Dr. Bekoff is the man behind groundbreaking research on animal emotions and is here to spill the beans on the intelligence, emotions, and maybe even the sentience of the animals we share our planet with. Whether you're a nature enthusiast, an animal lover, or someone who just enjoys a good podcast, you're in for a treat about animal psychology. Let's uncover the raw, the real, and the remarkably intelligent world of animals. Today, we're joined by Dr. Marc Bekoff, Professor Emeritus of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at University of Colorado Boulder, a Fellow of the Animal Behavior Society, and a contributor to Psychology Today. Marc, welcome and thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, me too. So there's a lot of things that were in your title there. There's even many things that I feel like I left out of that introduction. So can you expand a little bit and tell us of the work that you do?
Yeah, I'm really a biologist who studies animal behavior. So I'm called an ethologist. I'm really interested in a number of aspects of animal minds, animal cognition, animal emotions, sentience. And I focus more on feelings, emotions, and sentience, and try to apply that to basically how we treat them, or how we treat non-humans ultimately.
Yeah, I think one thing that I am really excited about is to touch on a lot of that ethical conversation of how do we treat animals, or often what's described as non-human animals. One place that I always like to start these conversations is, how did you first find your passion for animals? And then how did that lead you to be this Professor Emeritus of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology?
My life journey has been pretty nonlinear. I just was always interested in animals. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I lived there for about 6 years. And I used to say hello to all the animals, the dogs, the cats, the birds, the ants, and we had a requisite goldfish on the counter in the kitchen. I just always felt an attraction to them. I know it sounds very bolder to say that kind of thing, but I always did. I never doubted they had feelings. I never doubted they were intelligent in their own way. And I wrote a book called Minding Animals that appeared 20 years ago, which is a frightening thought because it just feels like it was published yesterday. But the title came from some talks I had with my folks. They said I minded animals, that I attributed minds to them, and I wanted to take care of them. Where I am now, although it was very circuitous, is not a surprise to people who knew me back then.
I always like asking this question because for some people, and I think for most probably who work with animals, that there's this unspoken attraction towards something in the animal world. And then for some people, it's a very direct path where it's just, I have to go to college to get this degree to then start working. And for others, it is this winding path that kind of ends up taking you on this journey where you learn so many things that then eventually are all these tools in your like tool belt that you can use when working with animals. I know a lot of the areas of study and research that you've done have surrounded animal behavior and cognitive ethology, like you were saying. Can you explain a little bit of what cognitive ethology is?
It's the study of animal minds, really. But from a biological point of view, it focuses on questions about the evolution of, say, different emotions and feelings. It could be the evolution of different cognitive capacities, how they're adaptive, why did they persist over time in particular species' behavioral repertoire, what causes the behavior? Is it an external stimulus? Is it something hormonal, something neural? And the development of behavior. And those four aspects of behavior were put forth by a Nobel Prize-winning ethologist called Nico Tinbergen. And so I really like that framework. And then a man called Gordon Burghardt, he formalized adding individual subjective experiences to that list of four. So it was a natural blend to be an evolutionary biologist, which in some ways I am, and also begin to wonder what animals were thinking and feeling subjectively. My joy, my grief, your grief, or comparing different species in terms of not whether they had emotions, because the real question is why they've evolved, not do animals have them, how they are used in social interactions.
Yeah, I think that's something that pretty much any time we research animals, we always learn that there's more mentally or emotionally going on than we had previously thought. I remember it was really surprising the first time it clicked for me that you have all of these physical traits like sharp claws, big antlers, horns, physical traits that can evolve over a period of time. But you can also have mental and emotional traits that develop over and evolve over a period of time. And I think people tend to separate humans because they think that we're sort of placed on top of this evolutionary pinnacle because of our ability to think or our sentience, but that these traits aren't exclusively human, correct?
Yeah, and that's a good way to look at it, Matthew, because one of the things an ethologist would look at would be that behavior is a phenotype, like ears, fingers, arms, something measurable. So Konrad Lorenz, who shared the Nobel Prize with Nico Tinbergen in 1973, stressed that behavior was something that an animal has as well as does, which means it's measurable, it's real, it's not ephemeral. And then you can ask those questions of, for example, like when dogs play, they do a play bow. They bow down on their forepaws, put their butt in the air. Sometimes they bark, sometimes they wag their tail. So you can ask the question, why did that behavior evolve? And how could they be measured? And before that, people were doing it, but Lorenz, in my mind, really formalized it to say behavior is something animals have on which natural selection could operate. So you could look at growling, you could look at play bows, you could look at different social displays, and they may be similar across species or there may be little differences, which means that the differences were adaptive. It was adaptive for individuals of different species to do things in different ways.
How do you look at sentience and how wide do you think it is spread in the animal kingdom? I think this is a question that a lot of people wonder.
Yeah, that's a good question. I just was writing something last week and I came up with the phrase, the biodiversity of sentience, meaning that it's very diverse, that you can actually see sentience. And I want to just say really straight out that the way I look at sentience is it's all about feelings. Academics can beat it to death, if you will, but that's what it's all about, the ability to feel. It's really widespread. All vertebrates have it for sure. And in the UK and other countries, they've recognized sentience in cephalopods, for example, lobsters, some insects. I don't know the true taxonomy of sentience, but it's broad. And then, of course, you can fiddle around with definitions. Do lobsters really feel pain, or what are they feeling, if anything at all, when they're dumped into boiling water? But it's a real question, and they may feel pain that may have no resemblance to mammalian, avian, or even vertebrate pain. But what I like is the fact that people are keeping the door open. The same with reptiles, snakes, lizards, and other animals who are kept as pets or companion animals. There's a big concern about their well-being because a lot of people mistake them for not needing much when, in fact, social reptiles are extremely socially needy and they need friends and family.
Yeah, and I think it's especially important when you bring those ideas a little bit closer to home with pets or companion animals, because I think that's something that it's not just taking your dog for a walk, but it's making sure that they're enriched mentally and have that ability. And I know that with birds, it's really important to have that mental component so that they can, because birds are very smart, make sure that they're using their brains and not just an object that is in your house. I really like talking about dogs and cats as examples because I think people, as far as pets go, those are two of the most common. And so I think people see those behaviors a lot. But I'm curious, how do you think that subjective experience and personifying animals crosses over? What's your opinion or your take on that?
You mean crosses over between species or?
Yeah, I guess I wonder, are there any dangers with personifying animals?
There's dangers, but if you do it carefully, then it's almost something we need to do. We have our own human language, our own human perceptions. And people call that anthropomorphism when you attribute human-like traits to non-human animals. I don't worry about it very much. I think most of the people I know do it very carefully. There's a lot of popular books that don't, but I don't worry that much about it. One of the things I do as a biologist, say you're focusing on joy or grief. I always say there's human joy, there's dog joy, there's elephant joy, there's elephant grief, dog grief, chimpanzee, orangutan, fish, parrot, whoever you want to throw in. And what I mean by that is that there's also Marc joy and grief and Matthew joy and grief. So even if ours differ, it doesn't mean I have it and you don't, or vice versa. So what I mean by that is there's individual differences among members of the same species in terms of what they feel and how they express it. I always call bringing it home when people are skeptical about whether, for example, wolves, I'll just say all dogs came from a common wolf ancestor. Do you think your dog enjoys playing or has fears and anxiety? Yeah, so do wolves. It's not being silly or anything. It's just we're not the only mammal, and certainly not the only non-human animal, who has rich and deep emotions. So I don't worry about it at all. And fact of the matter is what attracts us and helps us form long-lasting social bonds is sentience. It's shared feelings. Even if you don't express it or feel it, that's what's drawing you. Pet rocks, robotic dogs, they didn't really make it because it's that exchange of feelings that really, I call it a social glue. And that's why when a lot of people, when they can't have contact with other animals or nature in general, even trees now, we're learning, they feel alienated and out of sorts. So I think it's the sharing of these feelings that is really important in developing strong animal-human relationships.
You've written many books and articles, including The Emotional Lives of Animals, The Animal Manifesto, Wild Justice, and Animal Play. How do these books relate to your background and general area of interest?
I think all my books really relate to my background in terms of using what we know on behalf of other animals, animal protection, and also just my interest in the evolution of social behavior, different behaviors themselves like play bows or barking in dogs or tail wagging, and then different categories of behavior, generally within the social realm. So it could be play, it could be aggression, it could be different types of competition. It could be cooperating to get something that they can't do on their own. And even morality. The book Wild Justice has a subtitle, The Moral Lives of Animals, because it's very clear that animals have moral compasses. There's right and wrong. And when you look at a lot of animals, they know what's right and wrong. They know when they've violated some social norm. When dogs and other animals play, I always say they follow the golden rules of play, not overstepping. If I'm playing with you and I ask you to play, I don't try to beat you up or eat you or mate with you, for example. And years ago, when we wrote Wild Justice, which isn't that long ago when it appeared, but I'd been thinking about these ideas for probably 5 or 6 years before. I'm not saying that they're moral beings like us, that they know right from wrong in terms of not killing another animal for a meal. Although wolves can't go to Whole Foods or Ideal Market or A&P or King Soopers. But there's a lot of widespread interest in the moral lives of animals. And I think a lot of it came from the work that we wrote up in Wild Justice. Or people would attribute those moral codes and living by some kind of ethic to non-human primates like chimpanzees and gorillas, bonobos, and not to dogs or not to non-primates. But now we're knowing, and it's great. There's a lot of work now on birds who cooperate and will share food and all other things that would require some moral compass. And I think we're heading in that direction, and it really pleases me because there's no way that coherent social groups are going to evolve if everybody is in it for themselves. Just think of human groups. If everyone were totally selfish, then there would be no coherence and no ability to work together.
Yeah. Your comments about moral codes always take me back to the idea of when dogs get into the trash. There's this dogness of dogs that, they're going to take the easy food source that's there. But there is this moral code of, oh, I know I'm not supposed to do that. And there might be a consequence to that. And that guilty look that people often attribute to whether it's trash or ripping open a pillow or a couch or something like that.
I had a dog who once stole one of my jackets and tore it to shreds and peed on it. And he came to the door and I knew right away something happened. My first response was I was hoping he was feeling okay, that he wasn't ill. I think he was just pissed off at me for leaving him for an extra hour, to be honest with you. But you're raising a great point, especially with dogs, because we don't know whether dogs feel guilty because it's never really been studied, but there was a study that showed that we're not very good at identifying the guilty look in dogs. The woman who did it, I actually helped train her to learn dog behavior, but she never said dogs didn't feel guilt. She just said, we're not good at identifying the guilty face, the guilty look. So dogs feel guilt. There's no doubt about it. Because guilt, jealousy, all the other happiness, joy, grief, sadness, they're all part of the emotional soup, if you will, that allows animals to live together, just like humans. But I think this discussion is important for your listeners because, once again, I'm not saying that one group is more highly evolved. There's no such thing as higher and lower animals, for example. But it also means within species that you may experience different emotions differently and express these feelings differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Bees, for example, have evolved to live in a completely different world with different parameters and constraints on their evolution. And so it makes sense that human emotions might not have evolved in that world, but they might have a different set of emotions that make sense for the world that they live in.
Yeah, and these moral codes also vary by culture. Some cultures, killing for violating a social norm is the norm. And so, once again, the important thing is I'm not passing any value judgment on that right now just because I'm not part of their cultures and I don't feel as a good old white American living in Boulder, I have a right to comment on that. But right, you have to look at context and what works for social groups to evolve. It's not only individuals, but it's groups who also evolve. And you would just have total chaos if there weren't some agreed upon rules, whether you like them or not. So once again, I think these social norms, to me as a biologist and as a researcher, it's just exciting to even see different social norms apply in two different groups of coyotes or wolves. Not that they allow killing in that sense, but the norms of how individuals interact. And when I say get away with, I don't mean in a sort of secretive way, but what works and doesn't work can vary from group to group. Just like in humans, you can do and say things to friends that you might not want to do with people you don't know. Although your intentions are not malevolent, you just don't want to be misunderstood.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a sense of community that can exist on different planes, if you will. So there's the close community that you can have with friends and family. There's the greater statewide culture in Colorado versus if you go to Florida or California or New York.
Right, just north, south, east, west. I lived in New York for many years. I haven't lived there in decades. But when I went to college at Washington University in St. Louis, I met my first group of Mississippians, Alabamans, Texans. And we all got along, but there were definitely differences between Long Island culture and Southern Mississippi culture. Not a bad or good way, just different. I've actually thought a lot about that because I have friends still who were reared and or have gone back to different parts of the country or the world. And similarities are very intriguing, and our differences, although we share the same emotions, if you will, are very different. How they're expressed, how they're felt, what's okay to say or do. I think that's really exciting because it means that there's no universal dog and there's no universal human.
Very true. So like I said in your introduction, you're a frequent contributor to Psychology Today. In response to a recent study that showed when humans cause the death of a wolf, that wolf packs can become less stable and can even fall apart, Paul Parquet, a senior scientist at the Rain Coast Conservation Foundation, said that the foundation of good conservation and management of wildlife is science, buttressed by persuasive moral arguments and ethics. When you are writing books or contributing articles, what are some of your major messages or these moral arguments or ethics that you believe?
We've all done or said things in our lives we wish we didn't do, and I wish I didn't even become part of a group where there was a lot of invasive and pretty nasty research going on. My goal now would be to get people to study behavior, not to rush through it. I mean, one of the hallmarks of ethology is you just spend a lot of time watching animals, maybe not even taking notes, not even filming them. Today with iPhones, there's a pro and a con. You can film them, but it's different to watch them rather than through a phone or a camera. So I'd say watch the animals, pay attention to individual differences. Context, one of the most important things is context, is looking at who the individual is, their relationship with other individuals, if it's dogs, their relationship with humans, where an interaction is taking place. It's known across many species. There's something called the resident effect, and we probably all experience it as humans, that you feel more confident on your home turf. So who's involved, their relationship, where it's taking place, and then paying really close attention to immediate variables, immediate causes. Are you having a good day or a bad day? Did you have a bad night of sleep, bad dream, or a good dream? I mean, dogs feel that way. I still go, but not as much going to dog parks. And you'd hear people say, yeah, Rover didn't sleep well. I think he has a headache and he's really gnarly today. Well, of course he is. He's just like I would be if I were up all night worrying about something, or maybe he had an upset stomach. Maybe his feelings were hurt because something happened during his doggy day. But really paying attention to the details. And that's really what I love about ethological research, is that it can't be rushed. We had 5,000 or so hours on wild coyotes living outside of Moose, Wyoming in the Grand Teton National Park. And up until the very last day, we were learning something new. It's diminishing returns, but I just remember in our last month up there, we saw things and I went, oh my God, I can't believe that for the last 8 years and plus, we never saw that. The moral and the bumper sticker there was, don't conclude that animals can't or don't do something. And that's what happens in lab studies. You don't offer them the opportunity to express, say, their full behavioral repertoire. So are lab studies not important because of that? No, it's a limitation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to take that into account with the findings that those laboratory studies are bringing out of that research, is that, yeah, the ability for that animal to practice true behaviors like it would out in nature are a little bit confined. So the points you're pulling out.
And they can't get away from one another. They're confined in space. In the wild, if I don't like you, I'll just walk away from you, and more likely than not, we won't have a fight. But if we're still stuck in the same living room at home or in the same lab, it can get really contentious, and people would then say, these animals are really aggressive. No, not necessarily. It's just they can't get away from one another and they need time out.
And I like that you talked about watching animals and not just attributing things that you haven't seen to the fact that they can't express those behaviors. I always encourage people, whether it's a national park or a state park, even just like a neighborhood park or even your backyard, that watching animals there is a way for you to practice your own ethology or doing some behavioral work. because I think you can be surprised for, oh, I've never seen that done before. And just because you take that little extra time to pause and watch, I think that can go a long way. And I think that's an interesting point with the cognitive work that you do, is taking the more science work and then adding this sort of behavioral, subjective understanding to that. I think it's a really interesting balance that has to be struck.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on the second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals. And just over the last couple of days, I've been really writing around the idea that we need to be very careful about saying dogs don't or can't do something, or coyotes can't, or eagles can't, or fishes can't, or snakes can't. The fact is, in certain contexts, they can't do it because either they're bored or don't want to do it. A friend of mine who's a really well-known primatologist said that he really feels that what happens with a lot of animals in labs is they don't do things because they're bored, or it's just so unnatural to ask them to do certain things. So I've been really pushing that a lot, and it's well received. Don't say that dogs can't fly like birds, but let's not be absurd. But when people say, well, dogs don't feel guilt, or dogs can't have a sense of numbers or quantity. Yeah, they can. I've seen it in wild animals, and people in the right circumstances can show that. So don't say they can't do something or they don't do it. Because I hear my colleagues say, well, dogs don't do something. And I'll go, gosh, I was down at the Valmont Dog Park yesterday for 4 hours, and I must have seen dogs do whatever you're talking about 100 times. So, yeah, and that's the value of carefully watching and not interfering in their lives, letting them resolve conflicts, letting them form friendships, and then sustain the relationship.
One theme that I'm an advocate for is coexistence. And I believe that we're already coexisting with animals. Humans are just not very good at it. And you were actually one of the first people that I learned the term rewilding from. Can you explain rewilding and how coexisting plays a part in that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where you saw it, but I wrote a book called Rewilding Our Hearts. Rewilding to me is very simply put, and I'm not being curt about it, is making wild again, redoing something. But really it's tapping into, in my examples, it's personal rewilding, tapping into our biophilia, our innate attraction to nature, tapping into the fact that, at least for me, but I know for many other people, if I'm not outside or don't get outside to look at trees or flowers or bees or dogs or birds, I really feel a sense of alienation. So rewilding would be keeping up those contacts, if you will, with nature, other animals, their homes, rocks, rivers, but also realizing when you feel deprived. Richard Love wrote about nature deficit syndrome, for example, in kids. And yeah, it could be a disease. It's scary today to think of the number of people who spend it all day inside playing war games. Besides playing war games and learning how to kill other individuals in the game, they're not getting out and getting fresh air and appreciating nature. And I'm afraid over time what effect it's going to have. So it's even more important to get back out.
Yeah, I think another good example from my own personal life of rewilding that I can share is I lived in Spokane, Washington for a time, and coming from Colorado, where it's sunny all of the time, and living in Spokane, especially in more of the winter times, not seeing the sun, and there being this moment where I was taking out the trash and sunlight hitting my face, and just taking this moment where I had to have the sun just shine on me for a little bit. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, living where we live, I need to get out. I ride my bike excessively. That's what I do. And I've raced bikes for a long time. But even if I can't get out and ride, I just need to get outside. I took a walk this morning. You know, it's cold and snowy. Big deal. We all have the clothes. Maybe we all don't, but I've got the clothes to do that. So just being outside for 45 minutes just rekindled me. I could say, in a sense, it rewilded me to what was going on, although I'm not a particular fan of cold weather and snow, but getting out, and I just came back totally refreshed.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something about, as a human, kind of connecting back to nature. And to build off of that, I think it's beneficial, and it's part of a program that you've worked with. Can you tell me a little bit more about visiting inmates in jail and the Roots and Shoots program?
I work closely with Jane Goodall. Her Roots and Shoots program was developed in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, in the early 90s with 16 teenagers who went out and cleaned up beaches. And it's really spread into probably 120 or so countries have Roots and Shoots groups, and maybe many thousands around the world. The main goal, it's APE. And since Jane studied chimpanzees, the little acronym APE is good. It's really reconnecting with apes, people, and the environment. So it's really non-humans and their homes. And so the Roots and Shoots group at Boulder County Jail, I did it for almost 20 years, and then COVID put an end to it like it did for a lot of things. It was one of the most enriching experiences for me. Talked about animal behavior, conservation, ecology, whatever the guys wanted to talk about. There was no set curriculum because there's turnover. There was never a dull moment. They really 99% are really into animals, getting outside. For a lot of them, their best friends when they grew up were animals. They grew up in very difficult social situations at home. And I miss it. They do beautiful artwork. I submitted some to art festivals, and they won awards at art festivals. I've used some of their drawings in books, in fact. They write beautifully. I published some of their essays on Psychology Today, always with their permission. And when Jane Goodall was here, she spent a morning at the jail with me, and she loved it. She talked to the inmates. We hung out with them for a few hours. And on that very day, one of the inmates had a poem published in the Boulder Weekly. It was unreal. And so every time I would publish their artwork, beautiful pictures, line drawings, watercolors, pastels, I would bring it in. And it made their day. And I still run into some of them who are homeless around Boulder, and they're still drawing and doing the work. And I feel really good for helping them through very difficult times.
I'm sure they're very fortunate to have had those conversations with you too. I remember when Jane Goodall was out here, like you said, I had the opportunity to hear her speak, and it's something that if listeners ever have the ability to hear, I highly encourage it. And I know that you've worked closely with Jane on many projects, like you were saying. What do you admire most about Jane?
She's just really committed to what she does, full bore, almost 100% of the time. I really admire her tireless energy. She'll be 89 in 2 months, and she's still traveling. But her hope, her optimism, everybody makes a difference. That's, to me, one of the foundations of Roots and Shoots, is everyone makes a difference. So when these inmates would say, why do you want to talk with us? Why do you want to come in here every week and hang out with a bunch of whatever you want to call them? And I'll go, no, because you're not. You're a human being. And you deserve the ability to develop your skills. And when you get out into the public again, you can make a life. So I really admire her commitment, and it's really heartfelt.
I think that concept of hope is so important, especially when you think about wildlife and conservation, because some of the things that you hear in the news or reports that are coming out can be daunting about the current state of the world. And not losing that hope is, I think, what's going to be the salvation for that process. Do you have any advice, taking your background into account, for people in their daily lives, how they might be able to help people live better with animals?
I don't like giving advice, but I always just say to people, everybody has their ups and downs. For my dad, there was never a bad day. They were all degrees of good. That stuck with me. So you can be having a pretty crappy bad day, but instead of saying, God, this is a horrible day and all that, you could just say, well, it ain't a particularly good day. But it makes a difference. And I've talked to people like that. You know, if you feel you're in a position to help others, that's a gift, because there's so many people who are struggling. So I just think, find what really excites you and turns you on when it's other directed, when it's going from you to somebody. And that somebody could be a non-human animal, by the way. And psychologists clearly have shown and say that volunteering and doing something good for others is really one of the best ways to come out of a funk. And I know that from friends and some family members, that when they started volunteering at the Y or at a humane society or doing some volunteer work, hospice work, God, it really helped them along in terms of their own self-image, if you will, and how they felt about themselves and that they could actually contribute.
Yeah, it's kind of a win-win. Not only are you helping people or non-human animals, but then it does also let yourself glow a little bit on the inside.
It is, and it's okay to glow. It's okay for people to be proud of what they do or what they have, as long as they don't use it against other people. Because you've got to feel pretty secure to go out and do things for other people, because it takes time and energy away from yourself and things that you might rather be doing. But I loved going to the jail, and I really have missed it. I got a lot out of it, and it felt really good knowing that I could help people who were really marginalized as a group and did not have particularly good lives. And you could say the same about helping non-humans in need, rescuing and fostering dogs or cats or other companion animals who otherwise might be killed. Let's cut through the chase.
Marc, thanks so much for having this conversation today and exploring these topics with me. I'm curious, as we wrap up here, what are some of your current projects, or how can listeners best support you and your work?
Well, you could always go to my homepage, marcbekoff.com, and look at what I'm doing. I have a new book called Dogs Demystified, an A to Z guide to all things canine. So it's like an encyclopedia of dog behavior, alphabetized. So it's based in solid science, but it's written for everyone. No jargon. And the second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals. And I write regularly for Psychology Today. I love getting to the non-converted, and I love getting to folks who want to know more about animals, but I can't believe how lucky and the gratitude I feel that I can actually make a living, if you will, studying the emotional lives of animals.
Wonderful. And I'll add a little acknowledgement for you that I think the writing that you do is very approachable. I think sometimes when people think about morality and ethics, they think of these philosophers that use very technical words. And I think you do a really good job of having these conversations. And so I highly recommend your books. I know I have a couple of them.
That makes me feel good, because sometimes when you start boiling things down, people come at you hook, line, and sinker, if you will. But I think, if you know what you're doing, and I do know what I'm doing, I don't mean that in a self-serving way, then you should be able to explain it to a 4-year-old. There's a great line, and I love Groucho Marx and the Marx Brothers, and there's a great line when they're going through a legal document or something like that, and Groucho says, I can't explain it, go find a 4-year-old. But thank you for that, because I spent a lot of time doing that, because the bottom line is I want to get the word out about animal and animal behavior and all different aspects of animal protection and all that to as wide an audience as possible, in many ways, especially the non-converted or people who might not agree with me. It's great to talk to people who go, wow, that's great. Yeah, right on. And then you go, I want to talk to people who might not agree with me, as long as they're nice to me. They have to be polite.
A little bit of a prerequisite there, yeah.
A little prerequisite. You can't say some of the things that you'd probably like to say to me, or else I won't engage.
Well, again, I'm happy and honored to have you on the podcast today and to help, like you say, spread that message, cast that wide net. Marc, thanks for being on the show today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe. And to find out more about the work we do to support animals, visit our website at theechofilm.com. Follow us on Instagram at theechoanimals, and follow our TikTok at creature.feature. On behalf of all creatures, big and small, thank you for listening.